Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Gigi Ilbayumi, the founding director of the Rodham Institute. I'd like to welcome you back. It's been a few weeks since we've had a speaker series, but we are coming back with a bang because tonight we are hearing from some young voices. And before I have Ms. Ashanti Carter, who's our program manager, introduce the speakers and the topic tonight, I just want to remind everybody that we're now actually in the midst of a triple pandemic. It wasn't enough to have COVID. We now have influenza as well as RSV. If you don't know what RSV is, RSV is the respiratory syncytial virus that predominantly impacts kids. And it's really here with a vengeance, unfortunately, because when the kids were out of school and masked up, they did not get exposed in the same way. So the last few years, all of the RSV is now happening right now. And Children's Hospital, for example, is super full. So the way to protect everybody, there is no vaccine yet for RSV. There is one for influenza. And let me tell you, I'm taking care of a lot of people, adults with influenza. I know that there are outbreaks with kids and COVID. So if you have any symptoms of fever or body aches or any of that, get tested for all three, because we don't know which one you might have. There's a treatment for COVID, there's a treatment for flu. Unfortunately, there is not a treatment for RSV. The same things that work to protect against COVID are the same for flu and RSV, mainly hand washing, mask, stay away. If you feel like you're sick, please don't expose anybody else. I have a dear friend who developed Guillain-Barré from a vaccine, which means that she can no longer get any vaccines in the future. So everybody around her has to protect her. So that is the spiel for today from me, and I'm going to toss it to Ms. Ashanti Carter. Take it away, Ms. Carter.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gigi. Once again, my name is Ashanti Carter. I serve as the program manager of the Rodham Institute. I want to talk to you just a little bit about the advanced internship program of the DCCTE, which stands for Career and Technical Education. Why am I talking to you about that? Because this very webinar came from the brain of one of our interns, Mr. Luther Hoy. AIP is an internship program where we provide work-based learning opportunities for the entire academic year to our esteemed interns. So Mr. Luther Hoy, he's doing some great things at the Rodham Institute, and I'm going to toss it over to him. Take it away, Luther.
Awesome. My name is Luther. I will be the moderator for this evening. I'm a junior at Jackson Reed and also the IT intern for Rodham Institute this year. And I will now allow my panelists to introduce themselves. Claire, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Claire Simon. I'm 16 and I'm the initiative specialist at GenZForChange, which is a youth-led nonprofit.
I'm Sam Schlofstein. I'm 19. I'm the communications coordinator at GenZForChange, and I've had the pleasure of working alongside Claire for a little bit, around a year now.
Awesome. So our topic for this evening is voting suppression and the midterms. So Sam, why don't you kick us off and tell us, what is the Voting Rights Act and how is it under siege?
Yeah, so I think when we think about the Voting Rights Act, it's almost seen as like this very permanent thing, but in reality, like your question kind of implies, it's under siege. It's relentlessly been neutered under like the Rehnquist and the Roberts Court. And we've seen it even recently with this election in Alabama specifically. So yeah, I think it's being neutered constantly. And I think it kind of relates, not to get too partisan, but I think the sort of Republican Party a while ago kind of decided that they weren't going to win elections with the popular vote and decided that they were going to like try and manipulate structural factors, whether that's something like gerrymandering, which I think I don't necessarily think is a good thing. I think the Republican Party, if they wanted to, could still try and win the popular vote. But yeah, I think I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but that's basically it.
So you mentioned Alabama, but do you know any other areas of the country that are most impacted by voter suppression?
Yeah, so I think a lot of southern states are, especially POC communities. I think specifically with what's going on in Alabama, that's specifically diluting communities of color's vote. And that's what the Supreme Court hearing was about. So it happens to be like these southern countries and communities most impacted by things like climate change, things like lower air quality or worse infrastructure, bad water quality. Like these are the areas that are being disenfranchised by the Voting Rights Act being under siege.
Yeah, totally. And do you have any organizations that come to mind that are fighting against voter suppression?
Yeah, I mean, at GenZForChange, we try our hardest to at least push it out educationally. I think there's some other cool ones like the Voting Rights Lab, which does like a lot of research around this sort of stuff. There's other ones that come to mind. I think a lot of DC statehood organizations too, because there's a big intersection between DC statehood, as I'm sure we're going to get to, and Voting Rights Act. So Hub 51 is one, the Franklin Institute. Yeah.
And what is GenZForChange doing this midterms? Can you think of anything specifically, any specific communities that you are targeting, etc.?
Yeah, so one initiative that I'm working with another one of our interns who goes to UNC right now is we're getting students from across North Carolina colleges to make videos about the midterms, specifically going on their campus and like interviewing their peers, asking them why they're getting out to vote. And then we're like cutting it up and putting it on our page, making like engaging little videos. And I think that's really important because North Carolina has one of the largest independent voter populations in the country. So trying to grab as many of those votes as possible. It's an incredibly tight race. There's so much at stake this year. And, you know, that North Carolina Senate seat could play a huge role.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Claire, could you tell us a little bit about the midterms more in depth and what is the importance of voting specifically in the midterms?
So the midterms are super, super, super important this year for a lot of reasons. And, you know, the most basic of which is that majorities in both branches of Congress are very much on the line, very much in play. I really don't like to listen to polls that much. You'll see some saying, you know, like Democrats are going to keep X, Republicans are going to gain Y, but it's really, you know, anything can happen on November 8th. We see it time and time again with elections. But not only that, we have, you know, Congress majority, which is going to depend on what Biden can and can't pass, what he can and can't get done. We have abortion rights on the ballot in so many states. We have voting rights, kind of like what Sam was talking about, on the ballot in so many states. And that's where a lot of down ballot voting comes in. A lot of focus is obviously going to governor, Senate, and House races, which are super important for the reasons I just mentioned. But also we have lieutenant governors, secretaries of state, attorney generals, House, like state House and state Senate, that all have super critical elections, because as so many issues kind of keep being thrown to the states, it's like we're saying, okay, now these are states' rights. The state legislatures like have so much power now. So who we elect and who America elects to be these people who are going to represent them is going to play a very, very big role for the next 2 years and then leading up to 2024.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you definitely went into specifically for this year, but can you tell us something a little bit more broad about midterms in general? What are the elections that often occur?
Yeah, so midterms in general, and sorry, I zoomed in a bit, but they're super important because, you know, every 4 years, America goes really hard in on, you know, presidential elections, which very important. But, you know, what happens is that presidents are really kind of tied to what is able to happen in Congress. So like I was saying, 1/3 of the senators every 2 years and every House member every 2 years is up for re-election. So we can have the majorities in both chambers of Congress change, and that severely affects what legislation is able to pass and what gets blocked. So a lot of the things that are kind of topical issues, it'll depend on how we vote in the midterms will kind of determine how Congress can respond and what Biden can do. And then, like I said, you have a ton of state seats up every year. So it's really about, yes, the presidency is important, but democracy involves a whole lot of, elected officials from the very most local level all the way up to kind of the very top tiers of governors and Congress. So it's about electing those officials and reminding ourselves the importance of local politics and state politics, in addition to, of course, the presidency, which happens every 4 years.
Mhm. Yeah, and I also feel like it's often overlooked because of the presidential election not occurring, but it's almost just as important as the presidential election. So I feel like that's something in my personal life that often makes me overlook the midterms or not even know that they're happening. And so thank you for highlighting that. Sam, could you tell us about swing states and why do they play an important role this midterms?
Yeah, I think as Claire kind of mentioned, zooming in, there's a lot at stake this year, and especially when it comes to something like abolishing the filibuster. So being able to get a true majority in the Senate, which would require 52 Senate seats. And swing states, your vote means all that much more, as you could possibly determine something like having 52 seats in the Senate, which could protect voting rights, codify Roe versus Wade, pass climate legislation, all these huge things. So there's so much at stake. So if you're living in any one of the swing states, I encourage you to go out and vote, especially, or if you know anyone in any of those states.
And can you list some of those swing states that are happening and specifically in this election?
Yeah, so I'll try to do them all off the top of my head. So there's Pennsylvania, and Claire, correct me if I miss any. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Wisconsin. I know Nevada is one, even though recently kind of leaning Republican. What are the ones I'm missing?
Georgia, Arizona, Ohio, the governor's race there is very much in play.
Yeah. I said
and
Wisconsin, right?
Yeah, I think that's most of them. I feel
Yeah,
like they change slightly every year depending on what Senate seats are up, but a lot of the times it really is the ones that we listed. They're normally sort of consistent, at least some of them.
yeah, within the Senate too. And then yeah, gubernatorially, I know Oregon this year is going to be big. Because Oregon for the past 40 years has had a Democrat mayor, but I think this year that could change.
Oh, and Florida. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, Florida as well. And again, a lot of those lower level elections are super important, especially things like Secretary of State, when we have sort of this pervasive election denialism in the country. Like those people who are overseeing state elections, it's super important we get people in there who want to try and make elections more fair and competitive and believe in like the sanctity of our institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could just by hearing all these state names, I'm just thinking about there's such a long list. And going back to what Claire was saying about how all these poll sites are always like predicting it in advance, you never really know what's going to happen. I mean, there's just such a long list of states where it could just go anyway. But moving specifically to DC, Claire, can you tell us what's at stake in DC in the midterms?
So DC statehood is very much in play in the midterms. And do you want me to go into what DC statehood is now?
Yes.
Or should Okay, so DC statehood is the movement to make DC America's 51st state. Like that's just like point blank what's going on. But what it's really about is giving DC residents access to the same rights that those who live in the other 50 states have access to, which is including the ability to be represented in Congress. It's the ability to control their own budget and their own laws, also to control their National Guard. One of the reasons January 6th was such a mess is because DC does not have control over its own National Guard. And had it had that control, things could have been a lot different, maybe a bit of a faster response. There was a lot of tension between the mayor and Congress at the time with Trump and everything going on. So that's, one of the reasons where it's very important. And some people say, oh, DC is just a city. It's not like big enough to be a state. No, DC's population is bigger than the populations of both Wyoming and Vermont. DC's residents pay more taxes than residents of 22 other states per year, and they currently pay more taxes per capita to the federal government than any other state. And you can go to like dcstatehood.org, I think, and they have like everything listed out of kind of all the technicalities of how like we're financially able to do it. But in 2016, 86% of Washingtonians voted on a referendum, I believe, in favor of DC statehood. So it's not only wanted in DC, but it's important. One of the reasons it's important is because of the voter suppression tie, which is that DC is historically a Black city. To this day, Black people still make up a little under 50% of its population. And if it were to be a state, it would be one of 7 majority minority states in the US. So by not granting Washingtonians access to representation in Congress, it's really part of a wider movement of voter suppression that Sam was talking about before. So going back to that, your original question, one of the reasons that DC statehood is connected to the midterms is because DC statehood is constitutional and can be passed by majorities in the House and the Senate, but the filibuster. So we would need a majority in the House, which is very much in play right now in these elections, but we would also need either 60 votes in the Senate, which, let's be real, polarization, partisanship, it's not happening. But if we could, without the filibuster, if we had like 51, 52 votes, then it could be back in play. So like I was saying before, the Congress is so close this year, climate, abortion, voting rights, but voting rights as it specifically relates to DC statehood. If Democrats were able to keep a majority in the House and also pick up more of a majority in the Senate, then DC statehood would likely be able to pass. But yeah, Republicans are really not into it, A, because of voter suppression, but B, because DC is so blue, because it's so diverse, it basically guarantees 2 blue Senate seats and then also some blue House seats. So like no Republicans are into it, which is why Democratic majorities are so important. So that was a long spiel, but basically that's kind of like the scope of what's happening.
Yeah.
And if I could just jump in on this issue, because if one looks at the history of DC in the first place, DC actually was a haven. It was one of the stops on the Underground Railroad and was quite progressive and actually was going to be a port city. But unfortunately, Alexandria took that role. But why this is important in terms of DC statehood, we were number 7 per capita in African-American deaths from COVID. Because of the fact that we don't control our own budget, and the budget is really under the whims of the Congress, and was, and the president was Republican, we only got 2/3 of the COVID stimulus money that was allocated to all the other states. We are not considered a state, we are considered a territory. So this, people who are tuning in, it's like, what does this have to do with health equity? It has everything to do with health equity, because to the point that you made earlier, Sam, about whether it's quality of air or water or infrastructure, we know that 80% of health outcomes of life expectancy has nothing to do with seeing a doctor. It is all those structural and social determinants of health. So if we in DC don't have the control to be able to say, we don't have the money, we need, you see how COVID devastated us, and that we don't have a lot of other state funding that we would normally have, but to only have 2/3 of the COVID stimulus bill allocated to us. Now, of course, when Biden came in, he released the rest of the money, but we can't be held hostage, right? I mean, I often say that if the United States was another country, especially in the global South, what would we be saying as Americans about what's happening with voting? Wouldn't we send in poll watchers and to say that this is really unfair? So I just want to say that these issues are so important. The other thing is in terms of local elections, there has actually been a silent, bloodless coup that has taken place, in that you have had people such as the Koch brothers who, this is a country where they pour billions of dollars into elections. This year in the local, the midterms, $1 billion was given by one of the Republican donors, 1 billion. And what happens is that they actually have impacted the language that the Secretary of State uses, the bills they are trying to get rid of and basically outlaw certain books, censor books. So these issues are very important. And before I toss it back to Luther, can somebody explain to me what Gen Z is? I'm a baby boomer. I know what millennials are, but what is Gen Z? And I'll stop talking.
I can just jump in. I think definitionally Gen Z just means you're kind of born after, believe it's 98, right, Claire? Or is it a little bit?
It's somewhere between 96 and 98, but it's like the top tier is like 25, 26 right now.
Yeah. But I that's sort of the definition, but I think defining like characteristics, I think we're an increasingly like media literate generation. And I think with all the access to like information we kind of have, we're able to like see through a lot of the kind of BS, I'll say, of like certain politicians and like words not matching action. And I think that's part of what we are at our organization, is like trying to create real tangible change and also like holding politicians accountable. I mean, regardless of political party as well.
And something I'll add to that is that for the midterm specifically, this is the first year it's officially Gen Z members can run for Congress. So right now in Florida, District 10, Maxwell Frost is 25, Generation Z. He's running and is likely to win, his House seat and be the first Gen Z member of Congress. So that's also just something interesting that's happening this year. I thought I'd add.
And can I jump in? Miss Claire, can you tell us about GenZForChange? Come on, tell the people.
So GenZForChange is a youth-led nonprofit, and we're working to use digital tools to, like Sam said, make real tangible change. So we've done a lot of work this year on the midterms. We've been out on the ground in Texas and Florida, but we've also done digital events. On the 22nd, we had our own live stream where we hosted a bunch of politicians, including Beto O'Rourke, and had amazing conversations with them. We have a lot of social media accounts that we use to make content. We try to educate Generation Z, mobilize them, and kind of get them out and participating civically. So we do a lot of work. We had an initiative called our Safer Initiative, which helped increase abortion access. And we also do a lot of coding to help, we take down a lot of Republican CRT abortion tip lines. So we kind of utilize our media literacy and the digital tools we have on hand to kind of create change and make a really big impact and get our voices heard.
It's organizations like GenZForChange that are able to give youth voices before they're even able to vote. I mean, I know that there's now GenZForChange is able to vote, they're able to run for positions, but as someone who is on the younger side of GenZForChange or under 18, how can I make my voice heard in regard to politics and during the midterm, stuff like that? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm 16. I am our youngest member, but I would say that there's kind of two sides to kind of getting involved. And point blank, there's always a way to get involved, not just by working at Gen Z, but there's on the kind of political side, like for voting, even if you can't vote, there are so many ways to get involved in the elections and help people who can vote. So you've got phone banking, text banking, you have like social media, kind of like reposting graphics and making sure people know when early voting is, when absentee ballot is. Like there's all these different dates for all these different states, and using social media, spreading that information is something that everybody can do and creates massive impact. And like I said, you can phone bank either non-partisanly or partisanly for a candidate, usually with a campaign, and contact voters directly. I've done it a lot. I do it a lot at my school, and you can really get someone who maybe didn't know that voting was open or didn't know where their polling place was, like contact with them directly and get them where they need to go, all from your laptop or from your phone, which is a really great way. But I would also say that a lot of people are getting into politics just because there's so much going on. They want to help with like voting specifically. But I would say people really get into politics because of issues mostly, like, an issue is really important to them, whether that is voting rights or that's abortion or that's climate change. And there are so many things throughout the year, not just around elections, of ways to help. There are so many resources out there. via orgs like GenZForChange or Sunrise or all these other places, or kind of movements that start. There's always ways to get connected. And if you have a passion for something, to really kind of take a deep dive and to think about if you want to be helping on the ground, if you want to be helping digitally, there's always going to be a resource. And I think part of what we do is try to work with other organizations to help kind of bring attention to those organizations and give Gen Z more opportunities to get involved. Because I know so much in this country is centered around voting, and obviously, voting, great, please do it. But not everyone can vote for many reasons, but including just not being of voting age. And I don't want anyone under 18 to think that that is a barrier to their ability to be civically engaged.
Awesome. Sam or Claire, this can go to either one of you or both, and maybe even Miss Ashanti, you can give us something in here. How can organizations like the Rodham Institute collaborate with your organization, GenZForChange? I mean, at Rodham Institute, so many of our ideals are on social justice stuff and making sure that anyone is able to vote. And so what values do you hold that also match with that? And how can our organizations collaborate? I would say that, we've worked with a lot of organizations before. We're always looking for opportunities to kind of connect with other people, especially, GW's location in DC statehood. There's a lot that we can do together there. I think, that's something that, depending on how the midterms go, might be something that's really big again. And we might want to kind of pick that up and get something started on that, because time is always fleeting with Congress. And, even when you have a win, it's kind of, you got to take advantage of the moment. So definitely seeing how the midterms play out, but also long term, I think, connecting with college students is a big thing that we do, because, Sam can probably speak to this as a college student. I am a junior in high school. But, college students are really, not only can they vote, but they also are, a little bit older. They have more time. They're able to kind of do kind of more time intensive ways to get involved. And I think that, there's so many college students in our DMs kind of be like, hey, I want to get involved. How can I help? And I think kind of making those connections and showing college students, what they can do. Sam, if you want to speak a little bit to more what we're doing at UNC, I know you mentioned it, but I think there's always ways to get connected with youth. And I think colleges, it can sometimes be hard because there's so many and people are so busy, but it's not just about high schoolers. Like I was talking about before, like there is a lot of value in being a college student and having the kind of time and resources to get, really deeply involved.
Yeah, definitely concur with everything that you said, especially the amount of free time you find that you have in college, especially compared to high school. And I think too, there's a really unique aspect where you're uniquely connected to your community in college, whether that's like the town around you, you're sort of like tied economically in a way, but also like socially, how like college students impact your town, and you have a connection to a community, whether you're living in a city or a rural area. And so to be able to do like engage civically with the people around you and like connecting with your community, I think is something that can be truly really powerful. And I think at GenZForChange, in our horizon, we're looking towards partnering with more like college students and being able to create outlets for college students to be able to engage in their communities and of course create change.
And I'll just jump in and say, from the standpoint of DC specifically, we have 8 wards here in DC, the richest being where I actually live, and then the poorest. There is a huge differential, and we talk about college students, but only 42% of kids in Ward 8 actually graduate from high school. So it's really engaging young people, whether they are in school or are not in school. But I think one of the things that people are not really aware as DC residents is the power of testifying at DC council hearings. There are, not a lot of young voices that are there, and yet we talk about things like taxes on, sugary drinks, on things having to do with mental health resources and allocations, which here in DC, like every other urban area, we're seeing a huge number of young people, particularly trans and kids of color. Just the amount of angst and mental health issues has just just gone skyrocketed during COVID, and the resource allocation is so important, and having a voice by hearing from young people, I think is so important on those and other issues. Not to mention, one of the issues that was not brought up is gun violence. We are really seeing a huge surge here in DC. And we know that, for example, on the issue of gun violence, the people who perpetrate or perpetrators of the crime and the victims are actually usually from the exact same demographic. We tend to think of gun violence as something that affects teenagers, but in point of fact, the perpetrators and the victims tend to be from their mid-30s. We need to understand how, though, gun violence impacts young people. It's a virus, it's a public health emergency, and we're not seeing enough engagement by young people in things like, city council, in testifying, saying this is an important issue. We need to get more resources allocated. And how are those resources being spent? So I couldn't agree more with the work that you're doing. And I just have a question. Who came up with the idea of Gen Z for Change?
Gen Z for Change originally started as a movement in 2020 called TikTok for Biden. So back then it was very, very focused on social media, and it was a coalition of TikTok creators coming together to get Joe Biden elected, to kind of just rally around that. And that was started by Aiden Cohn Murphy. And then since then, and that was obviously fall of 2020. And then since then, Joe Biden got elected. So, you can no longer be rallying around someone who's already elected. So the org kind of had a shift. It became officially a 501c4, I believe. And in, I think, August of 2021, it became kind of officially Gen Z for Change, had that shift to kind of just continue using digital tools to let Gen Z make change. And I started in September 2021. So it's kind of been a lot's happening since then, but I think we kind of have our basic mission statement, but there's still so much we're figuring out what we want to do. I think post midterms, we're all going to sit down, kind of have a big brainstorm session of what we see for the org going forward in the next 2 years and what we want to accomplish. Kind of like Sam says, we're really trying to establish connections with students, activists, orgs, kind of everyone we can, and, use those resources. But I think we have a lot of good things cooking up and a lot of good ideas that we've been waiting to kind of get a jump start on. So, beyond just making change, I think we're trying to incorporate some new ideas and things we haven't done before. So we're kind of still evolving, but really excited to keep taking steps forward.
I have a question. There's been, so much controversy surrounding social media platforms. We heard about some comments that Kanye West made about Jewish people, and then Elon Musk acquiring Twitter. And there's a lot of anti-Semitic, just a lot of horrible things that's going around on social media. What is it that young people can do? And there's also a lot of misinformation, especially as it relates to our elections. What can Gen Z, or even people in my generation, Gen X, what can we do? How do we sift through the misinformation versus the correct information as we're looking at social media?
Yeah, I think this is one of those really difficult questions because it seems like nobody really knows what to do. And the power, what it's sort of been deemed as now is like the alt-right pipeline, where you like one video that's like slightly conservative, and then you're progressively fed more and more conservative content by algorithms. And we see even like disenfranchised communities are like more susceptible to this sort of information online. And it's kind of difficult to like understand what we can do legislatively. But I think while there's so much like, it's so scary, this alt-right pipeline, I think if there's the power, that if the social media has the power to push people down that pipeline, it also has the reverse power to pull people out. And I think that's what we especially are trying to do at Gen Z for Change, is trying to be that positive counteractive force, trying to make sure that everything that we put out is factually accurate, and like combating like COVID misinformation was a big thing that we were doing, like creating videos like how to approach your vaccine hesitant parents was like a huge thing. So yeah, being able to like provide those resources, provide the facts, counter arguments, and yeah, just like fact checking all that information, trying to pull people out of that, I think is a big part.
And to add to that
I
also,
could,
oh, sorry.
no, I was just going to say, I couldn't agree more with the whole disinformation aspect. Rodham is part of the Black Coalition Against COVID. And if you go to that website, blackcoalitionagainstcovid.org, you will see we did a lot of town halls, but also posted on social media, used competitions with actually young people to make sure that the messaging was diverse in terms of age groups to help counteract. So like you, Sam, I don't believe in just giving up and saying, oh, well, that's it. You know, we're going to just let these people or not these people, but disinformation take over. We're going to counter that with the truth as well as positive messages. I think that we're in a time now where people are going to get saturated with all this negativity. It's exhausting. I think that people, you know, it's kind of like junk food, right? At the beginning, people might want to try it and, oh, it tastes good and the variety. And then after a while, you feel sick. It's like, I need to get off this stuff. So what you are saying in your work is really you're providing an alternative, fact-based, really allowing people a menu of ways, a variety of ways to engage. And depending on what it is that they're interested in, if they're interested in the specific issue, a specific candidate, the process of politics, it sounds like you've got many diverse options for people to get involved and engaged.
Absolutely. And something I was going to add and kind of to your point is that, you know, a lot of people are like, social media, there's all these things wrong with it. Like, you know, like there's this bad and there's this and, you know, misinformation and kind of information stealing. And, you know, social media is not perfect. It's really not, especially a lot of the apps. But it's what Gen Z chose. Like, you know, you're not going to get through to youth like on the newspaper anymore, on TV. It's going to be through social media apps. And what we're really trying to do is just work with the resources we have to create as much positive information and factual information as we can and kind of put that out there and spread it so people can have it. Because at the end of the day, you can't change reality. But also, you know, just beyond like kind of pushing back past those negatives, what the power of social media is also so strong. You know, on the TV, you might see a story about like, you know, teachers are going on strike for XYZ, but on TikTok, you will see a teacher telling their story like firsthand, and really getting their experience and getting their account. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about it, that kind of personal connection that you can't so much get through the newspaper or through the news as much. And I think, you know, that's one of the reasons why it's so popular, is because it really does feel like a sense of community and connection is able to build really easily on social media. So kind of as to Sam's point and to Dr. Gigi's point, you know, misinformation, we're doing our best, but we're never going to give up, because we're at GenZForChange, we're really just dedicated to giving the youth as much information as they can that's really going to help them and help us make change in the world. And if that's through social media, that's what we're going to do. And we're also going to utilize the benefits of social media along the way to do even more cool things.
This is all fantastic. I do want to address Dr. Gigi's question in the chat, and also we have a couple questions in the Q&A panel. Dr. Gigi said, how did you get interested in this, in like social activism, GenZForChange? But I do also want to answer this. You know, as I said, I'm the intern this year at the Rodham Institute. I plan to major in public policy. I feel like quarantine, us being online so much, changed so many people. And going back to Sam with the alt-right pipeline and Claire with like, it's so easy to see so much media. It's kind of horrifying to think about. So many people are going down these rabbit holes where they get to like conspiracy theories and so much hate. And so, and you know, like that affected me as well. And it's terrifying. And so I want to be able to help this up and coming generation, even people who are younger than me. I'm kind of scared for their futures because they're so online. No one really knows what will happen to them? Like, we've never seen this in history. And so that's why I want to do this in my future. That's something that's really keeping me going. And so I do want to ask my panelists how they started.
Yeah, sure. So I've always been sort of politically engaged. Like growing up in Connecticut, I lived really close to Sandy Hook. I saw everything going on with like March for Our Lives. I always kind of looked up to David Hogg specifically. But then specifically in this sort of work, I kind of have a similar story to you. Where I was just like a social media like influencer person. I had never spoken politically, but with all like the COVID misinformation that I'd seen online, I really wanted to use my platform to do some good. And one thing, it kind of affected me personally too, because my grandmother, who was living in New York City at the time, had kind of fallen down like a rabbit hole on Facebook and was refusing to get like vaccinated. And I remember my dad would call her every single night to try and convince her to be vaccinated, because most of the people like living in her apartment building had like died from COVID. So like the stakes were super high. And I kind of realized that I could like take those phone call conversations he was having and like put them on social media and like work with GenZForChange to like promote COVID accurate information. Yeah.
Kind of similar to Sam. So I live in DC. And the thing about DC is it's like an environment here. It's like, it's really you live in it, you live in politics. And especially with what my parents do, it's just something that's always been a part of my life. And I think, one of the things that we're seeing of why youth is being so much more engaged is because so much has happened in our childhood. I mean, COVID started when I was 14. Trump was elected when I was 10. Trump was impeached for the second time on my 15th birthday. It's just all these kind of major once in a lifetime events, have kind of been scattered through my childhood and my life growing up. And I think that seeing it time and time again with Roe falling, especially, you notice that these kind of massive government, expectations and ideals aren't really true. Things have changed, things are scary. And, especially seeing this, like, January 6th was like 15 minutes away from me. It's scary. And I think that, there is so much hope that I want to try to bring to youth, but the reality of it is that, we have to do something. I say this a lot, but it's my future to fight for. It's our future to fight for as young people. And, if we want something changed, I wish, more of our older kind of politicians and those older than us would have fixed all these problems, but they haven't. So it's up to us to kind of get involved and do what we can. And it's a lot, and it's scary, and it's hopeful, and it's messy, and it's exciting, and it's all of these emotions all of the time, and it's stressful. But at the end of the day, it's always going to be these major issues: climate change, voting rights, my rights as someone who's LGBTQ, and my reproductive rights as a woman. I think that, those are always going to be there pushing me to do more, to be involved. And I got involved through GenZForChange just in kind of a weird way. I started as a scriptwriter for a TikTok account, but more to the point that I think there's a lot of people kind of who start at these pathways of just trying to do something because there's so much going on. You want to do something. And GenZForChange ended up growing a lot, and I ended up growing a lot with the org, and that's why I'm here today. But I really want to give value to, if you're just doing a club at your school that's, helping like, spread awareness about climate change, like that is meaningful. You do not have to be on a national stage all the time, doing major things for your work and your efforts to be meaningful. As long as you care about something and you are doing your best and doing what you can with the resources you have to help create change, you are doing enough and you are doing important work. And I think that's a message that GenZForChange tries to spread, that I try to spread, and that I really take to heart myself.
I 110% agree with everything you just said, especially growing up in DC, like everything. I do want to transition to some of the questions in the Q&A box. We have an attendee who asked, can each of the panelists name top 3 things that they think are the main concern? So anything really.
I guess I could speak for they asked to Gen Zers. I would say definitely reproductive, definitely climate. And then I think to what we were kind of speaking about earlier is just like integrity of elections, like seeing election deniers. I think that's something that we're especially keen to fighting against. But I think for me personally, I think justice is going to be a huge thing, specifically because I do a lot of research on like the justice system within the United States. And oftentimes there's like a lot of empirical research that goes in that proves that like more rehabilitative methods or rehabilitative approaches produce like better outcomes. And even though this like abundance of literature exists, it tends to be like public opinion that is what like ends up swaying legislation almost entirely. So when this year in the midterms, Republicans are spending just recently the most ad money on crime, like that's terrifying, that like what like bills we're going to see passed, what laws we're going to see passed, and kind of like public opinions towards like justice and crime, yeah, is scary.
I agree with Sam a lot. I would say it's really everything. Like it's not, so much like one thing over the other. It's everything, but I would say especially climate. And then to add, I completely agree with what Sam said. And then to add, I would also say LGBTQ rights as well as education and how those kind of have connected through Don't Say Gay in Florida and all these kind of local bills, book bans, everything. That's a really big thing. Gen Z is an incredibly queer generation. And, I'll always say, no one cares more about what goes on in schools than students do. It's like, it's their life, it's consuming. I just, school's a lot, especially in high school. And the bills that get passed, the bans that are in place, how education is kind of being filtered is awful. And it's impacting lives of students for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. Like it is their life. School is so consuming. And I think that it's always going to be at the forefront of Gen Z's minds, just like in their day-to-day lives, the same way climate change is going to be in their minds all the time.
Can I add something to what I think you, Claire, mentioned about the previous generations not fixing some of the issues? You're right, but remember that in 1965, there were several things that were passed, right? There was the Voting Rights Act, there was Medicare and Medicaid, all these wonderful social programs that really did impact the society in a very positive way. I think the lesson is not that there weren't people working for change or even that change didn't happen, is that there was a systematic process to dismantle all of these issues. I mean, if you look at what's happening to dismantle, they came after voting rights as one, of course, reproductive rights, of course, LGBTQ rights. And so it is, sorry, I got a Zoom call. Anyway, it is to me telling us that we have to be vigilant. I mean, once you win some of these rights, you can't just kind of sit back and say, oh, okay, well, now we have reproductive rights. No, this is something that will continue to be under assault. And so we need to always keep that in mind, or we'll be in a situation very much like we're in today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely agree so much with what you said. I think we're very much in a state where it's like one step forward, 3 steps back, because the systems, like you said, of America are designed to, push back on any progress that is made. And there are so many historical movements that have done so much for Americans. And, I definitely think that your correction is so important. And I thank you so much for bringing that up because it's true. And I think, as we go forward, like you were saying, like Roe, everyone thought like Roe's set, like nothing's going to happen to it. Nope. And, it's really working to both kind of fix issues as they happen, but also work at the systems that are keep pushing us back. So hopefully when we have a win, we don't have to keep struggling to keep it there.
Okay. We have one last question in the Q&A box that I want to get to. It is a little bit long and definitely a loaded question for us to tackle. But one thing that is happening recently is the rise of homeschooling, particularly amongst conservatives, fundamentalist households. The number of children homeschooled doubled between 1999 and 2007. And also definitely got larger during quarantine. This can lead to extremely narrow educational practices, which teach a version of history that may reinforce patriarchal and racist ideology. Many of these kids would be in the Gen Z demographic. Has GenZForChange given any thought to reaching out to or engage in dialogue with the other Gen Zs, particularly by using social media channels?
Yeah, I would just say one thing is that even outside of like homeschooling, like education is a war in like schools across America everywhere. Claire was saying don't say gay. I mean, there's been hotly contested debates over critical race theory, schools like Texas, right? And like what's taught in schools again is dictated by on like a local level. So that's why like local politics are all that more important, especially to be able to make sure that we have like a comprehensive education. But I think too, one of the unique things about social media, especially in sort of like this situation, is it gives sort of like an avenue for someone who might be a little bit isolated to be able to connect with us. And then in terms of us trying to like dismantle like maybe some more like conspiratorial or like right-wing talking points, I think we can really meet those people where they're at and like provide an alternative explanation to those things, which I think could be helpful.
Something else we work on to the broader topic of kind of like helping, especially Gen Z people who care a lot about these issues, but their parents are kind of force these certain ideologies on them, is we kind of have a lot of resources against that. So right now we're working on something that kind of details like a lot of the major Republican candidates on the ballot this year that are trying to, you know, fight against LGBTQ rights, fight against education, fight against all these important things. And what we were talking about to disinformation earlier, we have a long document of just like the facts about them, like just like straight up what their stances are in policies, like without it being, you know, kind of worked out in any way. It's just straight there, simple sentences, bullet points down the list, so people can see and have right there the information to kind of be like, okay, I think this, and it's like, you know, even though my parent is telling me this, like I can tell them from this informational sheet that like, you know, is sourced and everything, that this is not true, but this is. So kind of helping, you know, people talk to their parents about that too when they're trying to create their own ideologies, because I know a big problem is that you grow up in a certain household and those ideologies are kind of forced on you, whether, you know, you want them to be or not. And that's one of the things we did back in the day with vaccines as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for everyone. This has been great. Thank you for attending. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. Thank you for GenZForChange. Thank you to Dr. Jeezy and Ms. Ashanti for making this possible. And yeah, do you have any closing thoughts, Ms. Ashanti?
Well, once again, thank you to Ms. Simone Garcia, director of the, oh my gosh, my brain is actually about to just ooze out of my nose, but she's a director for the Office of Industry Engagement with OSSI, for giving us a wonderful intern such as you, Luther. I think you have a bright future ahead of you. And we at the Rodham Institute, we're so happy to have you. So I'm gonna toss it to Dr. Gigi Albayumi.
I think you're on mute. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, unmute yourself. No, you're still muted. Hit that microphone button at the bottom of your screen. No, that's okay. Don't worry about it. It's cool. It's cool. It's cool. That's okay. I'm gonna toss it to Claire and Simon for your last words.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. I think this is a great discussion. And to one of the questions, I hope we can like work together more in the future. That sounds really exciting. Yeah, and thanks again for having us.
Yeah, it was an honor to come on and speak. I thought we had a really, really meaningful discussion. And definitely covered a lot of important topics. I'll say if there's anyone watching, I know we're live. If you haven't voted, go vote, please. And you know, don't just vote the top of your ballot, vote all the way down. There's a lot of important local elections, kind of for the reasons we discussed. A lot of policy gets decided on a local level, and we really want to make sure that everyone who wants to can make their voices heard, all the way from the biggest scale to the smallest. Like Sam said, I'm really hopeful that the Rodham Institute and GenZForChange can continue to kind of cross paths in the future. And I had a really fun time.
Awesome. Awesome. I did too. One thing that I can say personally, just with the whole, the incident about the big lie, I was so interested in how our system and the process of voting works. I actually signed up to be a poll worker. So I've worked in probably like 3 elections, and it's great. I got a chance to see how the voting process works, putting together the machines, counting ballots, and all of that. So I learned something, and I'm not a part of Gen Z, but just being able to understand the process that our voting, it's a right. It's a right. Once again, it's a right. There were people who look like me who died for the right to vote. Get out there and make your voice be heard. I heard former President Obama say, you know what? They can't hear you, boo, but they can hear you vote. Let them hear your voice. You can boo all you want. Get out there and vote. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good one.